And it was hard and bitter in many ways. But again, you want to maintain that professionalism that sometimes things just don't align right. And so much in a coaching profession, for me, so much good had come my way in so many ways that you got to be able to take the bad parts that come too. It's all part of the profession. And you got to be able to be accountable for the results you're putting on the field. And as the head coach, you're ultimately responsible for those.
Welcome to Inside the Headset, presented by CoachComm. Each episode pulls back the curtain on the coaching profession, spotlighting voices from every level of the game and offering lessons and insights for your own path. But first, a word from CoachComm.
When the game's on the line, your play call can mean the difference between winning and losing. Don't let poor communication cost you the game. For 35 years, CoachComm has been the trusted leader in coaching communication, delivering solutions with unmatched sound quality, performance, and durability. That's why thousands of coaches in high schools across the country trust CoachComm. You put in the hours to prepare. Make sure your communication delivers when it counts. CoachComm, giving coaches the ultimate competitive edge. Visit CoachComm.com to learn more.
Follow Inside the Headset on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to our YouTube channel for exclusive content. Now, let's get inside the headset.
Coach, how we doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great, Mario. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, I appreciate you, man. Looks like you got some travels going on, man. So excited to hopefully shorten the trip for you just a little bit.
That'd be great. Yeah, no, it's all good. Just having a conversation driving down the road.
There you go. Well, we always start the podcast off with the first question being, when did you know you want to be a part of this great profession?
Oh, man, that is such a good way to open up, because for me, I started pretty young. Growing up, my dad was a high school football coach. So some of my earliest memories are, going to his training camp. And this is, he was a high school football coach, and they actually used to have their training camp at this camp. And I can remember just being a small little kid running around that camp, my brother and I, looking at those high school football players like they were the greatest players in the world, and just diving into, everything that was about football with my dad at a very young age.
That's awesome to be able to have that exposure. It's kind of interesting, as we've done this podcast for a long time. For some guys, it initially ran them off from the profession, but for a lot of guys, it attracts them to it. Either way, they all end up back in it. But that's great that you had positive experiences, along the way. Now, before your NFL journey, both playing and coaching, you started your collegiate career in Maryland. Kind of looking back on that experience, been the caller there. What did that help teach you about leadership, resilience, and just anything that you learned there that helped you along in this profession as a coach?
Man, so much. I mean, the time at college was very formative in many ways. First of all, Mario, I had two really great head coaches during my tenure, during my 5 years at Maryland. Jerry Claiborne, great college coach, recruited me there, and he was such a strong leader and great man, and had such a successful coaching career. And had him for my first 2 years. And then he ended up retiring, I think, for a minute. And then he went back to Kentucky for a little bit, as I recall. But then Bobby Ross came in, and Bobby really had a huge impression on me. Coach Roy, I still keep in touch with him occasionally to this day. He was so passionate about the game, so detail oriented. He had a great coaching staff. Coach Joe Kreback was my quarterback coach, and Ralph Region was the offensive line coach and the offensive coordinator. And those guys really helped me learn a lot about football, because when I was in high school, we ran a really, basic offense. And that was the big thing for me when Bobby Ross came to Maryland, and he brought a pro style offense. He had been in the NFL. And so he brought Ralph Region and Joe Kreback, and they brought in a pro-style offense, and that really opened my eyes to, how to play football at that level.
Yeah. Now, just out of curiosity, anytime I hear that pro-style and NFL style offense, the terminology thing always pops in my head. I spent a little time at Texas A&M Commerce under a guy who was a huge NFL Bill Walsh guy, and Man, I remember the paragraph of a play call that kind of came with it. How did learning those playbooks, because ultimately you end up playing for the Lions and Jets and the Panthers, and obviously you have a little bit of exposure to this NFL style offense in Maryland. How did you handle the play call, the terminology, been able to execute that at a high level?
It's like, as you're saying, Mario, every coach kind of brings in his own system and has his own language. It's like learning a new language. And obviously there's a lot of carryover,
right.
Between systems, but then there's still enough uniqueness. And, I remember back in the old days with Coach Ross, when he first came in there, it was still the digit system. It was 866, that's flat. You know what I mean? And stuff like that when you were calling a pass. And so the route tree for the receivers was, every number, was a certain route. And then you could digitize it any way you wanted to tell people what to do. But then as we graduated from that, and even my first couple of years in the NFL with that, but even within Coach Ross's system, there were still some things that was the early days of starting to teach things by concept, like, hey, what is this? You can call it 866, but what's the it's a dig concept, And so I think that's eventually where things went, what I ended up gravitating towards as a player and even as a coach.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, you spent your first decade of your NFL career in Buffalo, and you were part of, I think, 4 consecutive Super Bowl teams that made it to the Super Bowl. Just having that early exposure in the NFL to success, and what success looks like. What was it like being a part of an organization that competed at the highest level, and how and how did that impact your career as you continue to move forward?
Yeah, excuse me. Every step was important, but eventually making it to the NFL and competing at the highest level was certainly taught me a lot. I think, though, it was actually counterintuitive to what a lot of people would think. You would think you get to the highest level and you think, at that point, oh, it's all about winning. It's all about winning. And at one level it is, but really the truth of the matter is you find out at the highest level, they're even doubling down more on the process and the daily process of preparation, and how to behave like a champion. What does a championship practice look like? What does a championship meeting look like? Knowing, right, that the results that you want come from the right process. And I think that when you get amongst the best of the best, you find that's their mindset, that the victory, yes, there's a victory on game day that we're all pursuing, and it's very important. But we also, the heightened emphasis is on what does a victory look like in preparation. And so that's been a really fun journey to kind of develop that over the years.
Yeah, that's great. And then just trying to find these moments as a player that in some way I'm sure impacted you as a coach, and I'm sure there's so many different ways. But one thing for sure is you were part of the largest comeback in NFL history, still to this day. Even with all the spectacular comebacks we've seen over the last few years, with a 32-point rally against the Houston Oilers where you score 4 second half touchdowns. I've been a part of one of those teams, or actually 2 games in a row. We were in money games, and it was at a smaller Division I program. Played Arkansas. We were down 21 points in the second half, and it seemed like a mountain that we couldn't climb, and we were fortunate enough we were able to do it. And we're the following week against Auburn, kind of in the same situation. Being able to be a part of something as miraculous as that, how did that impact your career when you're down and you're the play caller or the head ball coach, and you're trying to motivate your team to kind of fight through and push forward and find a way to win?
Yeah, I think the whole key, the lesson that I learned back then and continue to learn to this day is, it's a one play at a time mentality.
Yeah.
sometimes it seems like, there's a huge obstacle in front of you. Like you said, you get down by a lot of points and you just know you can't get it all back at once. And, where are you going to find your answers? And listen, 9 times out of 10 are the new answers and you're going to run a sprint and you're going to run the whole thing. So you're going to get in there's no more players coming. So, we got who we got and we got the playbook we got. And so really it comes down to execution and the mindset of just, one play at a time, and one play at a time, one first down at a time, one touchdown at a time. That was the mentality, that I've always tried to carry with me as a player and as a coach. So as a coach, when you get in those situations where things aren't going right for you early on, I always fall back on that mantra.
Process oriented. I love it. So after your 14-year NFL career, you started your coaching journey with it as an intern with the Colts under Coach Tony Dungy, who we had on here actually a couple weeks ago. The hardest thing to do in this profession, I would imagine at any level, I'm not that privy to how you kind of get in at the NFL level, but I would imagine it's still very difficult, very competitive. Talk a little bit about how that process began for you to be able to get that first opportunity and get started in this game.
Yeah, it was really a combination of Tony Dungy and Bill Polian, who was the general manager for the Colts.
Yeah.
Bill Polian was the general manager of the Buffalo Bills, who they drafted me there, back in 1985. And Bill had said to me, ironically, after my rookie season in the NFL in 1985, he said, "Frank, I really think you're going to be a coach one day. And so, you should play as many years as you can. And then when you get done playing, you can expect a call from me to come and coach."
Wow.
And so sure enough, Bill was with the Colts and Tony Dungy was the head coach and Bill was the general manager. So obviously Bill was gracious enough to make that introduction and to kind of help me get my foot in the door, with Coach Dungy. And so was able to kind of connect and do an internship there for a couple of years to try to earn the right to come on at a quality control position and and see how Coach Dungy did it. And that was something else. He was just a 10 out of 10 as a leader and as a coach. And so for me to get a chance to learn and watch him early on was very helpful.
Now you had an advantage of being able to watch your dad work, as you grew up, and the extra hours he put in, the phone calls he got after hours, all the kind of things that come along with being a coach at the high school level. But I think, and this is me talking, and you might disagree here, but I think we all have this eye-opening experience when we step in a profession after we're playing, and you're like, God dang, you guys had, when I was a player, I showed up at 9. You guys have been up here for 3 hours, and when I go home at 5, you guys stay another 6-7 hours. What were some of those eye-opening experiences for you? Whether it's the hours, the time, the amount of film that you got to go through, the cut-ups, the breakdowns. What were some of those things that popped out to you that you were like, golly, this is a different world that we're living in now?
Yeah, no, that's so true, Mario. Actually, when I was playing, my last couple of years were with the Detroit Lions, and I had gotten pretty close with a couple of coaches on that staff. And because I played for a few years, I was 37 years old, I think, at the time. And I had a strong inclination that once my NFL career was over, that I was going to go into coaching. But I actually had a couple of coaches on that staff who were warning me, I might say, of, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into as a coach now. I understand all these years of playing, but, and talking about what you're saying there, just the extra hours and all the extra stress in so many other ways. I could almost say they almost tried to talk me out of it. But, at the end of the day, I did take a couple of years off after I got done playing, but, eventually connected with Bill and then Coach Dungy. And so we're really getting into that first time and just saying, hey, whatever it takes. I remember being there at 2:00 in the morning, drawing blitz drawings on PowerPoint, which isn't a drawing program. We didn't have Visio back in the days or whatever drawing program, anybody's using these days. we were trying to make PowerPoint work. And I remember, those early days, I was the offensive quality control assistant quarterback coach. So, I'm trying to do these blitz drawings for Peyton Manning, and and I'm, you don't want to get them wrong. You want to have every last detail on them right. I mean, you're this grind work that you're doing, breaking down film and doing drawings, is going before the best players in the world. And so, it puts pressure on you. You love that pressure, but it was a grind, but I loved every second of it.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. So during these early coaching years there with Coach Dungy, you were able to experience a tremendous amount of success. And then also you had the opportunity to be around Peyton Manning, who was a phenomenal quarterback. And this isn't your first time. You were with Boomer Esiason and Jim Kelly. As you're sitting here watching a guy of that caliber, Peyton Manning, what were you able to learn after a long career being around other great guys?
Well, I tell you what, I learned a lot from Peyton about being a coach. And you say, well, how so? Because he obviously was never a coach. But, I think I learned from Peyton about, just being a pro. He was such a professional, and so polished at everything. And, and what it meant, like, what it looked like to come into a meeting prepared and, to be accountable for your work and, everything from dress to conduct and what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. I was a rookie coach, even though I had played in the league. So at one point, I played in the league for 14 years as a quarterback. So, there was a little bit of a connection there and a little bit of mutual respect that I played in the league a long time. But in another way, I had a ton to learn about being a coach.
Yeah, for sure.
And as I'm sure you've talked to some people over the years, that transition from ex-player to coach is not an easy transition. It's not the same. It's not even close to the same. Yeah. And I really credit Peyton for helping me navigate that, and helping to show me the way about what him and Tom Moore. Tom Moore was the offensive coordinator who I was ultimately reporting to. And those two really helped me figure out what it looks like to be a coach early on in my coaching days.
Well, clearly they did a tremendous job, because from 2006 through your tenure to 2011, you walk in as a coaching intern, promoted. I don't know quite, if that's the right term or exactly how that went down, but you moved to offense assistant to quarterbacks coach to wide receivers coach. So you kind of get some full-time experience walking in as an intern. What, this might not be for you to answer, but what do you think they saw in you growth-wise to feel comfortable enough to promote you into these very important positions?
Well, ultimately, I trusted it was the quality of the work and then the interaction with the players. At the NFL level, the great thing with players are so smart, and they can sniff out a phony in a hurry, and or they can sniff out someone, not in for the right reasons or what have you. And so, every coach in the NFL will tell you that, the ability to command respect in the room and earn the respect in the room from the players is a pretty big deal. And the only way that you can do that is, well, there's a couple ways to do it. One, ultimately it's one way. It's help them prepare and get better.
Yeah.
And if they feel like you're helping them, that's what every player is looking for. Even though they know that's a great thing about players, that even though players can do what coaches can't do on the field, they still know they need help to get where they want to get, and they need a coach to push them in several different ways. So, I just trust that it was the work that I did to help players get ready, whether that was from a game plan standpoint or drills on the field or film breakdown and talk, presentations that you do over the years. I think a combination of those things.
That last year you spent some time as a wide receivers coach, and kind of carried over to your next job at Arizona, where you're the wide receivers coach again. For a quarterback, it's always hard for me to say getting out your comfort zone, especially when you're on the offensive side of the ball. But this is a position that you didn't play, I would imagine, probably ever. Been a quarterback. What were you able to learn, and were you uncomfortable at any point in time? Getting out there and coaching those guys on the outside.
I really credit Jim Caldwell, who obviously was the head coach after Coach Dungy. Helping me see the need to do that. Having a few years of experience coaching quarterbacks to help prepare me to be an offensive coordinator. He just felt like it was going to be important for me to see another position and get in there with the receivers. And that was an unbelievable experience. Reggie Wayne was in that room, Austin Collie, Anthony Gonzalez, and more, Pierre Garcon. Those guys, just digging into the dirt with those guys about playing the position. And listen, now, as a former quarterback, honestly, I always felt like I was part-time wide receiver coach, because you're always talking to the receivers about route running and from a quarterback perspective, what you're looking for. But I learned a lot from those guys, especially from Reggie. Reggie was one of the best route runners in the history of the NFL.
Yeah.
And he was so technique oriented and understood it at a high level. So I felt like I learned a lot from him. And then the same thing when I went on to Arizona and got a chance to coach Larry Fitzgerald at the same position. Obviously, seeing his work ethic and his ability and the way he played the game, the physicality that he played the game, and how he prepared. That was a very valuable year with Larry.
Yeah, man. So after this year with the Colts, as we talked about here, you kind of make your first jump, away from the Colts as a coach. At this point in time, you've already kind of did this in the league. You bounced around, but as an adult, I mean, as a as a person in the profession as a coach, was there anything unique to start beginning this line of moves, because you go from the Cardinals to San Diego to Philly to back to Indianapolis to Carolina to Cali for Stanford? You know what I'm saying? It's kind of a part of the profession a little bit. At the collegiate level, that first time can be, I won't say intimidating, but it can just be an interesting part of your career. How did you look at this move?
Yeah, I mean, it was challenging. I mean, there's family challenges when you're having to move around all the time. And, as a player, for playing for 14 years in 4 different teams now, I was able to play for 10 years in one city with the Buffalo Bills, but then a year with Carolina, a year with the Jets, and then 2 years with Detroit. I think those last 4 years playing and moving around helped me prepare as a coach and helped our family prepare. Like I said, I wasn't the typical young coach. I was, by that time, by the time I got into coaching, I was in my 40s. I was in my 40s, and my children were a little bit older. So there are definitely family challenges along the way, but it takes a partnership and a real commitment by, your wife, and understanding, we got to hold on loosely. I've been married for 40 years, and my wife will tell you, in 40 years of marriage, we have moved over 30 times. Now that counts a lot of little moves in season back and forth, but nonetheless, it's hard to put down roots at any one place. And so, that's why it's important in the coaching profession to find a life partner who understands what this is going to look like, because it can be challenging from that regard. And then you bring children into the mix, and that adds a whole other deal to it. And I like to say and think in the end, it makes everybody stronger. And I think there's something to learn from holding on to things loosely, and not getting too comfortable at any one spot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of positive things challenging, but a lot of positive things come from it as well.
Well, I tell you what, that might be the most impressive thing I've heard on this podcast over the 10 years we've been doing it is 40 years, 30 moves. That's, yeah, I mean, that would challenge anyone, especially, I mean, I'm assuming your wife kind of met you as you were, making some of these early moves as a player. But, professionally, sometimes they didn't sign up for this. They didn't sign up for, well, let me not say that. They certainly sign up for it when you get married, but they don't know this is what comes with it. And that's just impressive. You guys were able to hang on and keep everything sturdy over all those years. So now let's move over to San Diego, because this seems to be like a special stop. You move back to the quarterback's room and then ultimately end up getting your first coordinating opportunity. Just talk about more of the coordinating opportunity that first year, some of the first year, good things and bad things that kind of come along with being a first-time play caller.
Yeah, obviously, Mike McCoy was the head coach there with the Chargers, so it's thankful for the opportunity he gave me there to come in there as the quarterback coach to, Phillip Rivers, who, come on now, this guy one of the greatest of all time as well.
Yeah.
And just had and still do have a very unique relationship with Phillip. And, like all the quarterbacks I've worked with, learned a ton. But I was there for 3 years, and, Ken Wisenhunt was the offensive coordinator the first year. So, really had a chance to watch Ken operate. He was an excellent football coach and a really good play caller. And then when Ken left to be the head coach at Tennessee at the time, that's when Mike McCoy promoted me to the OC. And, I just felt like it was the ideal situation. We had an elite quarterback in Phillip Rivers. We put in this offense that was, when I got there in 2013 with Ken Wisenhunt, myself, and Mike McCoy, we put in, Mike had been with Peyton in Denver. So, we were putting in a lot of the Peyton Manning offense. But at the same time, we knew we had Phillip Rivers. And so we sat down with Phillip, and, Phillip had been with Norv Turner for many years and had a lot of success with Norv. And so we kind of tweaked everything and kind of made it our own. And that was a lot of fun. And in those early years, Nick Sirianni was on that staff.
Mm-hmm.
Shane Steichen was on that staff. So it really, myself and Nick, and, after Wisenhunt left, it was myself and Nick and Shane that really ended up, tweaking that offense to what it eventually became. And those are some fun years. And I will never forget the many, many hours of conversations with Phillip Rivers and getting his perspective on things as well. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's all. I actually didn't realize that, that group of guys was kind of there at the same time. And obviously you guys were in the back room just trying to figure this whole thing out. Now, just reflecting back on that first year, obviously at this point in time and, calling a game, it's still difficult for anybody, but, it was probably a much different deal, a lot more comfortable now. But just that first game, you're responsible for calling the plays and making the decisions. What were some of the nerves walking into that, and what is something that stands out or you remember from that?
I got to tell you, Mario, I feel like play calling that's what I may enjoy more than anything about the coaching profession, and it's so early on. I mean, some people who were Buffalo Bills fans know that back in the day when Jim Kelly was tearing up the league, running the no-huddle offense, the no-huddle take-on offense that we had all put together, we were calling our own plays back then, and when Jim was on the field, and, Ted Marchibroda was our coordinator, and obviously he was the leader and had orchestrated the whole thing. And, but the play calling was interesting. Ted called, some of it, and Jim would call some, but I was very involved in the play calling when we were running that no huddle offense. Jim and I had a system, we occasionally, and I wasn't obviously calling every play. It was really a kind of a group effort, but that's really where I got my feet wet in the play calling thing, was more as a player. So by the time it got to be where I was a coach, and, and I had, been in Indy with Peyton and so on and so forth, and then had a chance to go to San Diego, Phillip Rivers. it makes you feel a lot more confident going into game calling plays when Philip Rivers is your quarterback. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, that's right.
Because at the line of scrimmage, you give him the keys to the car. I mean, see, we always ran, when you have a quarterback like Peyton or Philip, you can run what we would be a QB-centric offense. A lot of people talk about QB-friendly offenses. That is important as well. But I really think that ultimately you want to put together an offense that combines the two. Like you want to QB-friendly. You want to be able to have that run, play, pass stuff that the quarterback doesn't have to do too much at the line of scrimmage. And you're giving them easy completions, and the run game's really helping, and the play pass stuff, it's easy progressions and reads. That's a great world to play in. And as a coach, you have a responsibility to give your quarterback those, what Peyton would call breather plays. But ultimately, I think to win championships, at least at the NFL level, you need to be able to turn the keys over to the players. And that starts with the quarterback position.
Yeah.
But in order to have a QB-centric offense, you need to have an elite quarterback, and or one who thinks, at least is mentally elite.
Yeah.
And so when I was at San Diego there with Philip as a coordinator, we had that, so that if I made a bad play call, and I'm sure I made more than one or two, Philip always had the opportunity to get us out of it.
Get you in the right play. Yeah, that becomes super interesting. I actually like you kind of explaining that is QB centric and QB friendly. Like that is a huge difference. So let's move on to the next gig with that same thought process in mind. You move over to Philly in 2016 and quickly become a part of a team that ultimately will go on to win its first Super Bowl in franchise history. And obviously, anybody kind of can remember the timeline on that deal. Carson Wentz gets injured late in the season, and I'm assuming that you're QB centric with him, and you guys have a great trusting relationship. And all of a sudden, you're late in the season, and you're moving to Nick Foles, who ultimately wins the Super Bowl MVP. Just talk about that QB centric philosophy and how that kind of played out that year, where all of a sudden, it's a different guy in that seat late in the season.
Yeah, no doubt, and that is true. We were trying to be both, as you said. Being able to turn the dial up on QB centric stuff. Even though Carson was only in his second year,
yeah,
he was really, really, really smart player. Really understood football at a high level. At North Dakota State, they did a lot of NFL type stuff, and so he came in and made that transition mentally very easy. But what's interesting, Mario, is, then he gets hurt, and now, and he's having an MVP season. 13 games into it. If the season ended that day, he's probably going to be the league MVP. And, but he gets hurt. And so Nick Foles steps in, and we're QB centric. I don't want to say in an entirely different way, but it looked different because Nick was a different style. And part of the way we did that was, we dived back into some of the film that he had when he was with Chip Kelly, and a lot of the success that Nick had early in his career. And really, I spent a lot of time talking with Nick, about some of his favorite concepts, and then Doug Peterson, who was the play caller and the head coach at the time, who we had an unbelievable, still obviously do have a crazy good relationship and trust. We were just able to make that switch, and from a game planning standpoint and a play calling standpoint, to kind of suit the game to Nick a little bit more. And those first couple games, we still kept winning, but they weren't easy. But when we got into the playoffs, things really started to click for the team and for Nick, and it was pretty fun.
All right, I'd tell you probably the coolest thing that I'm hearing from this is, you talked about there, San Diego, how you guys sat down in that room together and just kind of recreated this playbook and made it work. And then now you're talking in the middle of the season, you're making this QB switch, and you pull out film, and you're watching him with someone else and what he's good at and all that kind of stuff. I think that's really impressive. I don't know if everybody goes to those measures. Probably in the league, I would imagine you got to, but even at the collegiate level, when all of a sudden you got to go to your second or third string quarterback, just going back and looking and seeing what that guy's comfortable at, that is extremely impressive. And then, what goes without saying, you guys end up defeating the Patriots 41-33 in Super Bowl. I don't know which Super Bowl that is. When the Roman numerals kill me. But you guys are able to kind of go on and win that Super Bowl in 2017, 2018, I believe is the year. Ultimately leads to your first opportunity as a head ball coach in the NFL. Just talk about what led up to that, and then talk about that first time that door closed, and it's just you sitting in that office trying to figure out how to run this thing.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was obviously a tremendous run in Philadelphia. Really, like I said, led by Doug Peterson and Howie Roseman. Howie obviously had put the team together. Doug was kind of the leader as the head coach and play caller. And, it was an epic journey, an epic season. And so, and you had all that leadership, but really what it always comes down to in the NFL and really at every level is the players. So we had a great group of players and on all three phases that led us to a championship. So that as we coaches know that you always want the players have to outplay their coaching in order to win championships. And that's certainly what I think what happens everywhere. Teams win championships. It's players using good coaching, taking good coaching, but ultimately outplaying their coaching and making things happen to be able to win championships. So, after that run in Philadelphia, then, came the opportunity at Indy, thanks to Howie Roseman and Mr. Lurie, really for me, because and Doug Peterson for, when teams come calling and when the Colts came calling, it was a unique situation there. It's been well documented. I won't go into the details, but, but ultimately when the Colts came calling, the first people they're calling is the owners are talking and the head coaches are, and the GMs are talking. And so it's certainly a shout out to those guys. But, then you have the opportunity to go in and really present a plan for a vision that you have for a program. And that was a lot of fun. And, talking with, Mr. Irsay in those early years and the Irsay daughters, getting to meet them early on. Chris Ballard, the GM, he was really the guy running the show and running the interview process. So to get that call from him and to be able to dive into, how we're going to put, how he envisioned putting this team together from a personnel standpoint. And what does that look like when we sync things up together from an offensive and defensive and special teams vision? Man, as a coach, come on, does it get any better than that? You're sitting there talking to the GM, figuring out how you're going to create this championship program. So that was a lot of fun. And, so for me, stepping in as a head coach and getting to work with Chris Ballard early on was a pleasure because, every GM's a little different, but Chris is, he's a coach at heart. Chris is a coach at heart and he sees the game at a very high level. He's not just a great evaluator, but he's coached and sees the game at a very high level, across a lot of different positions. So that was fun to really work with him and get my first opportunity with him as GM.
And, during that 4-year run, you guys were able to have 2 playoff appearances, maintain the tremendous offensive production that you kind of had throughout your career in midst of starting 9 different quarterbacks over that time frame. Just talk, when you start talking about management, your, injuries and all those things that kind of come along with being a head coach. How did those situations shape you, this deep in your career?
It's a big deal. Like we just said, the game's really all about the players. I like to say that, the game is like 80 or 90% about the players, 10 to 20% about the coaching. But then when you factor in that in the NFL, half the games are 1-score games, that 10 or 20% of coaching is pretty important.
Yeah, again.
So going back to your question about, how do you, with the injuries and the turnover in the roster and all that stuff, yeah, you got to figure it out. Because that's just a fact of life. In this sport, it's a violent sport. Guys are getting hurt all the time. I think what helped me is, Tony Dungy Coach Dungy really, more than anybody, helped me have the right mindset. Every coach talks about next man up, and every program is going to use that term. Hey, next man up, next man up. Very, very famous, right? Term, very well used term in our profession. But to embody that is something different.
Yeah.
And Coach Dungy embodied that better than any coach I've ever been around. He just never flinched. It didn't matter who it was. And him and I will say Bill Polian, the two of them and because you need both, the general manager and the head coach. And those two really set the tone for me and helped me have a perspective of the mindset you have to have as a coach.
Now, after this, tremendous run of being a head ball coach for the last 5 years, I guess, with the Colts, and then in 23 with the Panthers, you step into this very, very unique role there at Stanford. This has been your first collegiate job as well, and I kind of tie this into something you said earlier. You were talking about you were talking about like what players want, and they want to be coached, they want to be developed, all this kind of stuff. What were some of the differences that you saw as you stepped into the collegiate world for the first time in regards to players and what they want?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big let me just say this about that transition first, Mario. I would say, as you said, like from the time to Indy to Carolina, but the time at Indy was great, and like I said, making the playoffs a couple of years and having all these different quarterbacks, and we never really were able to get that figured out the way we kind of wanted to, but still having a pretty significant success in our first 4 years, and then I don't want to skip by the getting fired part, because that's part something every coach goes through at some point,
Yeah.
And you get let go, and you just realize that's part of the business.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's nothing personal. Certainly, like when it came to Mr. Irsay, like this man, obviously, now it's past, but like he's one of the greatest owners and individuals I've ever, like, so gracious, so giving, so generous, and really understood football and really tried to give us every chance possible to have success. And so, but it ultimately didn't work out. And 5 years is a long time in the NFL. And so when it doesn't work out, you have to, as a professional coach, you just have to say, hey, did you do everything? No, you need to learn the lesson. There's lessons you need to learn, moving forward. And, and then you got to move on. And it doesn't have to be a personal thing. It certainly wasn't there because, I maintained my good relationship, with Mr. Irsay until his passing days, and certainly with his family and the Colts organization.
Yeah.
And then, you go to Carolina and, with Mr. Tepper, and, and it just didn't work out. It was a hard situation. And again, you learn lessons. And, the one thing I really appreciated about Mr. Tepper, he was very clear about what the expectations were going to be, that, he knew that it was going to take a little time to rebuild, but he wanted to see progress in that first year, from the previous year, and we weren't able to give him that. So, I ended up getting let go, after a year, and it was hard and bitter in many ways. But again, you want to maintain that professionalism that sometimes things just don't align right. And so much in the coaching profession, for me, so much good had come my way in so many ways that you got to be able to take the bad parts that come too. It's all part of the profession. And you got to be able to be accountable for the results you're putting on the field. And as the head coach, you're ultimately responsible for those. So you move on from that. So I move on from there.
Will you let me interject real quick? Because I want to say thank you for that. That's awesome. I mean, I only imagine how tough the Panthers deal was. I just really didn't want to dive into that. And just the fact that, that's it is a part of the profession, to your point. And I just want to ask you this question, and then we'll go back to the transition. Like I said, sorry to interrupt, but I mean, how do you handle that part of the profession, just so with your head held high, and just say, hey man, let's talk about this real quick. Don't skip that. That's a part of my journey. I mean, that was awesome.
Yeah. Well, a couple things. First of all, you've had enough of a body of work that you understand that, listen, I remember Bill Polian tell me, Hall of Fame general manager Bill Polian told me when I got into coaching. I remember he's the one who told me in 1985 that I would be a coach in the NFL one day.
Yeah.
And he told me when I eventually got into it, he said, Frank, just remember this about coaching. It's a terminal profession. It usually doesn't end well,
right?
And especially in the NFL. And so that perspective helped. Obviously, getting fired in back-to-back years was incredibly hard, but that's also under the context of some wildly successful years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Winning Super Bowls and so on and so forth, and playoff games, and so there was much to be proud of as well. And then you just know from the coaches and the players that you've worked with, and the feedback that you get from them along the way, that just kind of helps give you the perspective to kind of keep learning and growing. And then, I'll also just say, I'm not going to break it down, but I have to say, or at least have to mention that, everybody has to have something to lean on. And, for me, as I mentioned to you earlier, I had married 40 years. So my wife is a big help and support. And then ultimately, my faith is at the center of everything that I do. So that's kind of the circle that enables us to kind of navigate the journey that we have.
Yeah, that's awesome. Once again, I appreciate you sharing that. Now, if you want to pick back up to the transition to Stanford.
Yeah, transitioning to Stanford, man, that was again, won't go into all the details about how I got there, because I was thinking I was going to retire, and because I was not a young man at that point, I was probably going to do some consulting. Nick Sirianni, who was with the Eagles, was talking to me about maybe helping them a little bit, him and Howie Roseman, maybe helping in the consulting role at some level. But then Andrew Luck calls and says, "Hey, can you come out and be the interim head coach?" And it was Stanford. It was Andrew Luck. I mean, I had a great relationship with him. And so, we just thought this would be a great experience. It's a 9-month experience that I went out there, and I don't regret one day going out there. It exceeded expectations. I think, getting back to your earlier question, about the difference in the players, where I think at the NFL level, there's more true collaboration with the player. At the college level, they're looking for a little bit more, hey, you were just coaching where I want to go. Tell me what I need to do to get there. You know what I mean? Tell me what I need to do to get there. Show me the way to get there. And so in that way, it's similar to the NFL player that just helped make me better. But I think at the college level, you're more saying, this is our offense. This is how to do it. Is there some collaboration with the players? Yes, but not near as much.
Yeah, I got you. Now, just starting here with a very unique opportunity. Played for the Jets in '96. Get an opportunity to reunite with Aaron Glenn, named OC here recently. Just talk about why this opportunity is special for you at this point in your career.
Yeah, I mean, now getting to the Jets, I remember getting back from Stanford and again thinking, I was 63 years old at the time, getting ready to turn 64, and I pretty much like if I didn't coach again, I was fine, I was good. I had such an amazing journey as a player and coach. That if I time out a route right off into the sunset as a consultant, where you're not winning, you're not living and dying with every win at quite the same way you are when you're the head coach or the coordinator or the play caller. But, I got back from Stanford and my wife said to me, like, hey, I remember sitting in our living room. She just said, I could feel you come back to life, after the 2 tough years.
Yeah.
The last 2 years in the NFL, her comment was, I could kind of see you come back to life. going out to Stanford, working with Andrew and working with the players out there. It was just such a great experience. And, and so her comment was, hey, if somebody calls and you still want to do it, hey, we're all good here. And, so that was, and we talked about that a lot. And, it was going to take the right and, at the time making that decision, people thought, oh, Frank, what, why, and because, I had a great experience my 1 year in New York. We didn't have a good season, but I had a great experience there. I'm a Northeast guy. So, and I love I love the opportunity in front of us to turn this thing around and to help AG, carry out the vision he has for this team. He's a great leader, not a good leader. He's got a very clear vision of what he's trying to do. And when he called me up and explained to me what that was, it was very easy for me to buy into. And I like the opportunity, as we were talking about earlier, where it looks like there's a big mountain to climb in front of us, the Jets organization, but with the vision that AG has and Darren Mugie, the GM, with all the work that's been done, I'm excited about this year and the players that we've acquired and that we have on the roster. I don't know, maybe it's because I'm at the end. I feel like I've never been as excited as I am for this year. And awesome. A lot of that comes from AG and the players and what I'm feeling from the players. And not just that, it's really the head coach and the GM who I really like a lot. But the vibe that I'm getting from the players, that's special. But then the third element of that is the opportunity in front of us to make history. You know what I mean? Like it's to make history, man. That's what we want to go there and do. So it's a long road ahead. We got a lot to prove and a lot to do, but that's the journey that we're on.
Well, I tell you what, Coach, I've enjoyed the journey that you've done as a coach, as a player in this profession, and obviously just with the amount of stops and the longevity in your career, we left some meat on the bone on some of these stops. But maybe we can get around to it at some point in time. But I really appreciate you pouring into everybody with your stories, and I just want to leave you with this last question, kind of end on when you look back on your journey. Getting that foresight from Bill Polian about you being a part of this profession and making an impact, and then not just having that prophetic kind of thought, man, you running with it, Super Bowl, countless just top offenses, and just the lives that you've impacted. When you look back on your career, what advice would you give to a young coach, trying to build a career in this profession that lasts?
Yeah, I think every coach, we just need to dive into where we're at in the moment, and this profession is such a great profession because, our job description is to bring out the best in the people around us. And, there's so many pure and good things about that. You know what I mean? That as a coach, it's not about the reputation of this that we build. It's really about that's backwards. It's just, how can I go in and make things flourish? My wife and I talk about, sometimes we'll use the example of a garden. She likes gardening, and how do we go in there and just, till the soil, put the right fertilizer and plant the right seeds, do some pruning. That's the hard work, give constructive feedback, help people grow and get better and keep growing and trying to do that ourselves from learning from the coaches and players around us and just enjoy the journey, man. Such a good profession. And I would also say this, there's nothing wrong with aspiring to make it to the NFL, but the great thing about this profession is you don't have to be at the NFL to get to reap the greatest benefits there are from being a coach. Yeah. And sure, the money is great at the NFL, but that's not the greatest benefit.
Yeah.
You know, it really comes down to the people and the relationship that you have with other players and with other coaches. Every coach knows that's really what it's all about.
Amen. Amen. Well, Coach, thanks so much for spending some time with us, man, and imparting your wisdom that you've been able to gather. And once again, your relationship with your wife is still probably one of the most impressive things. Just been able to have those types of conversations and dialogue, and her to see your energy back in the profession and things like that. Man, that's inspiring to hear. So we'll be wishing you well. We'll be keeping up and cheering you on. Okay.
Thanks, Mario. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Coach.
When communication counts, trust the headsets trusted by the best. From high schools to the biggest college programs, CoachComm keeps coaches connected and teams prepared to win. Learn more at CoachComm.com.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Inside the Headset, presented by CoachComm. If you'd like to learn more about this week's episode, head over to AFCA.com. There, you can access every episode and find corresponding show notes. Remember, you can catch every episode of Inside the Headset presented by CoachComm on wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. While you're there, we love for you to take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Your feedback helps us improve and grow. Keep up with the latest news by following us on social media. Connect with us at Inside the Headset, and remember to tag us when you share your favorite episodes. For more updates on all things AFCA, be sure to follow the @WeAreAFCA social media accounts. If you're not a part of the AFCA community yet, visit AFCA.com to join thousands of NFL, college, and high school coaches nationwide and across the globe. Elevate your coaching game with an AFCA membership. You'll gain exclusive access to the annual AFCA convention, magazine, digital library, and AFCA Insider email. Stay up to date with the latest stories and news on the AFCA website. More than just a convention, the AFCA offers continuous education, guidance, networking, and more. Celebrate the past and shape the future with the AFCA. It's about fostering exceptional coaches who create outstanding teams and even better individuals. Invest in your skills and make a lasting impact today by engaging with the AFCA. Your journey starts here.